Hello, this is Kevin Trainer. I'd like to welcome you to my tutorial on designing and authoring XML documents for data interchange. And most of you are part of my XML for Libraries course at UWM, but others of you may have found your way here on YouTube, and you're certainly welcome to stay. But today what we're doing is we're following up on a lecture in which we talked about how to design and code an XML document for data interchange, and now we just want to kind of watch it in action using the Oxygen XML editor. And at this point in my course, we're not really using all the Oxygen XML editor features, but we do want to get familiar with the layout. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the menu and I'm going to click on Window, and I'm going to say Reset Layout. Am I sure? Yes, I am. And what you can see is in addition to having a middle gray panel, which eventually is going to have the editor window in it, I also have some panels on the left and some panels on the right. And I would say that these are going to become very important to us a little bit later when we're using more of the features. So what I like to do is I simply close those extra panels by here, because I'm in OS X. I have controls that look like Mac controls. But in Windows, you do the equivalent thing. I think there's some kind of an X in the upper right. And I don't know why that wants to stay there, but apparently it does. Let's see if we can get it off to the right. Good. All right. So we're going to design an XML document. We're going to author it as we design it, and this is a typical approach. So in the Oxygen XML editor, we're going to go up to the menu and click on File, New. Okay, and here I get a list of recently used documents, but you probably don't have such a nice list because you're probably just starting to use the editor. So let's go to New Document, and the first one's XML Document. So highlight that and click on the button for Create. And what do we get? Well, we get an XML declaration. And an XML declaration, as we've learned in the lecture series, is just a very polite way to say this is an XML document. It's using version 1.0 of XML, which is the original and very popular version. And the encoding of the document is a Unicode encoding called UTF-8. Which is an encoding of the document that's very popular for English language text documents, which is just what we're going to have here. So we get that, as I say, for free. It's generated for us, and it's just the kind of thing we want to start with. Okay? Now, how do we design an XML document? Well, I find that the best way to do it, for me, is to start with an example document. Okay? Now that's kind of getting in the middle of things in that, well, where does the content for an XML document begin? Well, they often begin in paper documents. Okay? We want to contain the same kind of information that we have on paper documents. We'd like to be able to contain that in XML documents. And what a lot of people do when they're loading how to design XML document types is they go out and they get a collection of paper documents, and they try to design an XML document that carries the same information. Okay, so from there are a couple ways to design. The way that I'm going to recommend to you is to come up with a sample document. Okay, when we learn how to create schemas, there are a lot of people who begin just by creating the schema. They create the rules for the XML tag set. Now, I think that's at least an intermediate, if not an advanced skill. And not having an example document, I think they miss a lot of things in their design. So you could jump ahead and just write a schema, or you could do what we're going to do here, which is come up with a sample. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to come up with a class list for my class at UWM, XML for libraries, because we have a common idea of what information that is and what might be included, and that's a great way to start on a tutorial like this. So every XML document has a single enclosing element that we refer to as the root element or the document element. And for a class list, I'm going to say it should be called class list. So I just start to form the start tag, $, that's a $, and it typically, because case is significant in XML, we begin with lowercase. So I'm going to say class. Oh, it wasn't lowercase either. Class. And then I'm going to say list. And this approach, instead of using hyphens between words or underscores, most people who design XML tag sets will use camel case capitalization. So capital L for list, and then just lowercase ist. Okay, now this is an approach that's become very popular in programming languages and has a good following in XML. And you can see in how we're using the editor that as soon as we formed the start tag for class list, automatically the editor gave us the end tag. Now, for some people who are not used to that, that's a little more help than they wished for. To those people who are a little bit put off by this auto completion feature, I say stick with it, you get used to it, you come to see it as a benefit. So I'm going to put some room in here. So what's inside of a class list? Okay, well, I'm going to say it's got a couple of parts. First of all, we have lots of data that describes the class, okay? And sometimes us library folk might call that metadata. Okay, so let's say we're going to have a metadata element, okay? And then let's say we're going to have a list of students, okay? And we can take two approaches here. We could just start off with student for the first one, okay? And then we could have another one and another one and another one. Or we could be a little bit neater and say that instead of doing that, we're going to create an element that's a container for all the students. So I'm going to create students, which is a container for multiple student elements. And I'm using these blank lines, or what XML people call white space pretty freely here. Okay, so I'm going to have a student. And let's work on the students first. Students are pretty important. Okay, so we've got student. So let's see what we're going to do. Let's have the name. Okay, so there's a couple approaches to student name, and you really have to ask yourself, how are you going to use the student name? Well, I happen to know that I create a lot of things using my XML tools where I create lists of students and I create feedback forms. And there are times when I want to spell out first name, last name, middle initial, and there are times when I want to give the classic sort order last name, comma, first name, middle initial. Okay, so I'm going to say inside of name, I'm going to have subparts. First, okay, middle init, last, and then let's be really fancy and say that people can have a suffix. That's mostly a male affectation, but we'll leave it there anyway. Okay? Okay, so every student has a name, and I'm creating a sample document, so I want a student that has a name. So my famous test student is always named Jane Q Scholar. Sort of the scholarly version of John Q Public, okay? And she typically doesn't have a suffix. So in XML documents, their style is that if a piece of data is optional and it doesn't occur for this instance, for Jane Q Scholarship, doesn't have a suffix, we just omit the element altogether. We don't you put it there and have it be empty. We omit it. Okay, so that's my first student. Okay, let's have another. Okay, so we have the student name. Do we have anything other than the student name? Let's have some more data about the student. Okay, so in addition to name, let's say I'd like to keep information. This is an online class, and I'd like to keep information about a couple of things helpful. Let's say I want to keep their location. Okay, the reason I want to keep their location is I find it sort of easier to relate to people when they're online where I know where they are. So let's say we're going to have location. Okay, and what do I want to know under location? Well, let's say I want to know city, and I want to know state. I could want to know more, but I don't. So let's say that Jane Q Scholar, oddly enough, I get a lot of online students who are in California. And let's say that she lives in Studio City, California. CA. All right. Now, another thing I find happens with my students is that they tend to use names. They tend to have nicknames that are not their formal names. Okay? So maybe I want to have an optional nickname, which I'll just call the element Nick. Okay. And let's say that Jane's nickname is Crusher. Okay. Because she crushes her work. She's a tough one. And that's it. So that's enough information for me to know who's in the class, how to talk to them, and kind of remember where they're living so I can relate to them a little bit better. Okay, that's good. Now, so how many? Let's let's see the concepts that we've used so far. Well, we've used a required element like first, an option one like middle init, and an option one like Nick. Location two that are required. Well, that's good. All right. Do I want to put anything else? I'm thinking not. All right. Now, how would I decide this in a more realistic environment? Well, if I had a real sample document next to me, there was a student list, I would be looking on it to say, do I want everything that's on here? Do I want some things in addition? Are there some things I don't want? So I might actually take a true sample document and use it to design my document type as we're doing now. Okay, so let's create another couple of students, and here's how I do it. Why type when you can copy paste? So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to create 3 students altogether, and I make liberal use of blank lines because they, even when they're saved, they don't take up a lot of electronic space. So the first one is Jane Q Scholar. The second one is Robert No Middle Init Jones. And let's say that Robert likes to go by Rob. Okay, and he doesn't live in Studio City, California. He, like a lot of my students, lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Okay, and last but not least, let's create Linda, no middle init, Lanier, and let's say that she calls herself Lynn. Let's say she spells it L-I-N. And Linda lives in Spring Green, Wisconsin. Okay. So, okay, but I don't have so have I shown all the possible data? Well, remember how I said that I could maybe have a suffix? I haven't used the suffix yet. Okay, so let's go to Robert Jones, and let's say that Robert has a suffix. And let's say that he's a junior. Okay, so now we've shown that as being optional. We've got middle init as being optional. We've got Nick. Does everybody have a Nick? Everybody has a Nick. So let's say that Linda Lanier is not going to have a Nick because we want to show in our sample document that it's an optional item. Okay, pretty good. All right. And the only thing I think that is at all sort of a trick that comes with experience is this idea that we would like to have all of the occurrences of student happen inside of a containing element that I call students. Did we have to do that? No. I think it's a helpful style, though. It's particularly helpful when we are trying to transform the document using XSLT. It can be pretty helpful later then. It's a bit of a crutch, but it's okay. All right. Okay, so we have required elements, optional elements. We have repeating elements because what element do we have that repeats? Well, student repeats. We've got 3 of them. Okay? Now, one question we haven't answered, and we're going to leave it open for right now because it's only a question that you need to answer when we start to learn about formal schemas for XML documents. Could we have a class list that has no students in it? Okay? It's pretty clear here because we have 3. We could have 3, we could have 10, we could have 25, but could we have 0? It's pretty clear we could have 1, 2, but could we have 0? Well, this example doesn't answer that, and your typical example documents don't answer those kinds of questions. Those are the kinds of questions that you answer when you create a more formal schema. Okay? So let's come up with the metadata, the identifying information. So let's do this. I teach at several institutions, so let's say institution. And let's say University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And then UWM is how we like to refer to ourselves in short. Okay? So that's the institution. And then we want to say what semester is this for? And let's say this is for, I'm doing this in the spring of 2016. Okay, so let's hope that this tutorial has a long life. And let's say that we're going to have a course number. And this course XML for libraries happens to be infost, which is our prefix 780. Okay. And then we're going to have a section number. And this happens to be section 201. Guess it's an online course, and that's how we do that. And let's have a course name. And this one is called XML for Libraries. Although I think it's of interest to people inside and outside of the library world. And we probably want to know the name of the instructor. It makes it a more general document that I would be able to give to, say, people who are not me, okay? And then they could use it in a more general kind of way. So my name is Kevin Trainer, okay? And we've got that. So now I'm going to save this. Now all along here, okay, I'm going to save this, and where am I going to put this? Well, I'm going to put this in my teaching for spring 2016. let's get out of the lectures and let's create a new folder called tutorials, and we'll create this, and we're going to call this one class list. And we're going to call this class list.xml. Okay, so we've saved it. Now, all along, the Oxygen XML editor has been checking our document for well-formedness. Okay, and now we can tell that by the fact that there are no red marks over here. Okay. One of my students was kind enough to point out the other night that the continual checking of the document for well-formedness, the well-formedness or lack of same is indicated at the top of this right gutter with a green box. Okay, so it's automatically being checked. Okay, if we were to break the well-formedness by accidentally deleting an end tag, well, what's going to happen? Well, in the upper right, we're going to see it's turned to red. And also, there is an indicator in that right column of where the error is. Now, when you have a big XML document, that's a help because you can click on that and get the document to spin up to that point. Now, this is a very short document, and we were already there. Okay? And then I'm going to hit, I'm on my Mac here, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo, and you can see that red squiggly line that was identifying the problem went away. All of the red in the right column has gone away. And the other way to confirm that it's well-formed is to go up to the toolbar number 2, and go up to the red check mark icon and take the drop down to the right of it. Instead of clicking and saying validate, we say check well-formedness. And down at the bottom, you can see a green box document is well-formed. Okay. Now, had we just clicked on the checkbox, it would look for a schema, and we haven't associated a formal schema with this, a formal set of rules about what's legal in our tag set. So it's going to give us an error if we do this. And we get a validation error. So you see at the bottom, validation failed, errors 1, and the error message says there's no schema or DTD associated with the document because we haven't gotten that far yet. So let's go back and say, well, we meant to check it for well-formedness, and everything looks pretty again. Now, I've got examples of just about everything we learned about except for attributes. So far, we have carried all the data in sub-elements. Well, what would be an interesting attribute? Okay. Sometimes you might want to say that a list is as of a certain date. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say that the class list element has an attribute called as of, little a, little s, capital O, little f, equal, and then in quotes we're going to have the date. And I'm going to use a date that is in a particular format according to an ISO standard. So today happens to be 2016 0202, and I'm going to put that right there. So we just have a single attribute. Typically, I have a preference for sub-elements in the tag sets that I design. And but I always like to use attributes, and the assignment that I'm trying to get people ready for requires that we use at least one attribute, and we've done that here. So again, we have some of the information is in an attribute, we've got required elements, we've got optional elements, and we have elements that it can occur more than once. Student. Okay? So that's all we wanted to really be able to demonstrate, and we've got it done. I just want to remind you that this tag set is one that we designed based on our needs. And as the tag set designer, I got to decide what the names of the elements were, what kind of content they could have. Could they have text content? Could they have sub-element content? I got to decide what was going to be carried on an attribute, what was going to be carried on an element, and I got to at least imply how many times each of these element types occur and where. So these are the things that make up the rules of a tag set. Another expression that we use for XML tag sets is XML application. So we have designed a tag set or application for class lists, and we're the designer. We got to make all the decisions. Okay? So that's enough for right now. I'm going to say bye until next time.